So now but it just
Conrad, can you hear the microphone audio?
they've got 2 kids, Rob, a 2-year-old and 5.
Conrad's muted.
Right.
I can never get the,
Conrad, can you hear the audio?
I think it's
Yes, I can. It's good.
next door neighbor
Great.
who got pregnant now too, so they went from 2 to 4. But you know, it's just and you know when he has time off, he wants to spend it with his kids, not up there.
hello.
Hello.
Pastor John Frost has graciously agreed to meet with us today, as he and all of our Westminster ministers have when we've asked him over the years. He will give us an update on how the church's international partnerships are going, especially now that we haven't been able to visit any of them during the pandemic. He will also talk about a new initiative called Chosen, in which church members can support a child overseas with whom they may be able to strike up a relationship. But I'd like to give a plug to an unusual event that John will preside over this Sunday at 4 p.m. It's called the Blessing of the Animals. You can bring your dog, cat, duck, hamster, parakeet, goldfish to the church. I guess outside under the portico or in the parking lot, and have God's blessing conferred on it for its companionship and for being a valued member of our families. I don't know about you, but my wife and I have a dog, a 2-year-old Australian Shepherd that you see over on the left, named Nora, who has been a great source of energy and laughter during the shelter-at-home pandemic. She takes us for walks, chases frisbees with a passion, herds us through the house, as is her hereditary instinct. I'll bet many of you have animal companions at home who deserve a blessing. Some of us will be on a fall foliage train trip at the time, and we won't be able to make it. But I'm going to give John a picture of Nora, and maybe he can sprinkle some milk-bone dust over her, and she'll intuitively sense that she is one of God's chosen creatures.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, this is the blessing of the animals. I'll just say a quick word about that before getting into today's topic. Our denomination published a new edition of the Book of Common Worship. So this is a collection of resources for worship. The most recent one came out about, I want to say 2018 or so. And in the section on, did anybody see a numeric code that appeared on the screen briefly?
Yeah.
What was it?
4221.
Thank you very. Oh, I missed my window. Sorry, there's I have to. All right, I need to pay attention for this again. I missed the window of opportunity to connect. Let's see if
Mine off.
Anyway, in this new edition of the Book of Common Worship, in the section on creation, there is a blessing of the animals service included. And so I actually didn't know that before we started talking about doing one this year at Westminster. But it's, have any of you been a part of a church that did something like that?
Italy.
In Italy, yeah. That makes sense. And it's a lot more common in the Catholic Church, Episcopal Church. But it's often tied to the Feast of St. Francis, which is October 4th. And so we're doing ours a little bit later in the month. Let me see. Let's try this. Try this again. But yeah, 4221, same code. Aha. Come on. All right. Oh, not quite yet. Okay. All right. So those who are on Zoom, you can see where it says international partnerships. You're seeing that?
Yes, looks good, John.
Great. Awesome. Love technology when it works, right? All right. Well, let's open in a word of prayer. God, we thank you for this day to gather together in this place, and we're grateful for the fellowship that exists within this group, and grateful for the opportunity for them to resume being together in a variety of ways, to continue to grow in their friendships and in their growth in their faith and in their wisdom and knowledge as they explore a host of topics and things in the life of the church. So be with us in this time, we pray. In Christ's name, amen. So as Craig mentioned, one of the things he had suggested I talk about is our international partnerships. This is an area of the church's life that I've been involved in for a number of years. And I guess just to maybe unpack what that means when I say that, the outreach committee supports a whole host of organizations that I'm not going to get into, all of them. But the ones I'm really focusing on are ones where there has been, travel with groups from the church that are a typical feature of that partnership. And then I'll talk a little bit about some newer things that we've done this year. Craig mentioned the one program Chosen, which we held back at the end of August. So if you can think back to the week of, let's see, Monday, it would have been Monday, March 9th of 2020. Or actually, I'll back up to the night before, Sunday evening, March 8th, 2020, and it's hard to think back to just what the feeling was. We were certainly becoming more and more aware of this thing called COVID-19, this coronavirus. I think at that point we were mostly hearing about it in the Pacific Northwest, like in the state of Washington, where there were some cases, but it hadn't infiltrated our daily life yet. And certainly not, it hadn't affected what we did as a church at that point. I remember this date because Monday, March 9th, I was flying, I was to board a flight with two other members of the church to Honduras as part of our work with Living Waters for the World. And we were going to be there March 9th to the 13th, so Monday to Friday. And I remember talking with Rachel the night before, about should we be concerned? Like, should I not go? What is this thing? And it's just hard to remember what it was like to really not have much of a grasp on it. And, at that point, I don't remember what the airlines were doing. I don't know if they were yet requiring, I don't think they were requiring masks yet, though many people were wearing masks. And ultimately we said, I think if, it's not widespread, it's pretty isolated. I think if you're careful, use hand sanitizer, just do what you normally do when you travel, make sure you wash your hands a lot. And, and so we went. So I flew to Honduras on that Monday morning as part of our work with Living Waters for the World. We were visiting a couple of communities where we have water systems in place, and just a chance to reconnect and just see how they're doing, offer some further training, things like that. Where we were was a pretty remote area, and so for the bulk of the day we didn't have cell signal. I'm wondering how far would I have to move to be seen by them?
About to the middle. About by
Is that where do people normally speak from further in the middle, or?
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, folks, I didn't realize you couldn't see me. That's all right. Eh?
Oh, thank you.
All right, so if I go, it's funny, you gotta like figure out where everyone is. So I'll try to occasionally, look back here and wave. So we had very little cell signal for throughout the day because we were a very remote area. When we got back to where we were staying, as soon as we connected to, as soon as we got cell signal again, it seemed like every day another huge event or just thing was being canceled, because of concerns. I mean, I think like the March Madness tournament, right, didn't end up happening. I think the NBA, postponed games. At some point in the middle of the week, I think the Westchester School District, either closed because I don't think they were equipped yet to do remote, so they just had closed. So it was like every single day, it was like, what else? Like what else? And then the day before we were to fly home, neighboring country El Salvador closed their borders, so flights, things. So we had we were starting to panic. I mean, I was starting to panic a little bit of like, okay, because our hosts were also very concerned because they're, as they always are, very concerned to just take good care of us, get us back home to our families, get us to the airport in time. And their concern was that, often Honduras and neighboring countries, they kind of take cues from one another. So if one country closes their borders, it's not uncommon that, Honduras would follow suit and do the same. We ended up just staying the course, and we got home fine without issues, thank goodness. That Thursday night, the 12th, our session met on a conference call, and moved to hold worship for the next 2 Sundays, so March 15th and 22nd, streaming only without in person. And it all, if you remember back to that week, I mean, it just, it's one of those times where like you probably remember where you were and just what you were feeling. But for me, the experience of COVID, I think because of that week, is so tied to this world of international partnerships and the work that we've been involved in. So, everything changed, right? I mean, March 15th was the first of many Sundays where we were not meeting in person for worship, and then a lot of other things began to change and mirror that reality. So reality began to sink in, and I think there was definitely this period of, okay, is this going to be, is this, how long is this going to be, and we're kind of like feeling it out. It began to sink in that this is not going to be weeks, right, of this new reality, that this is going to be months. I mean, at that point, we're thinking, okay, maybe it'll be months, maybe by the summer, maybe by, and then it kept being pushed out, right? I remember I'm part of a monthly, so even prior to COVID, I'm part of a monthly conference call. It's the Honduras Mission Network, and it's comprised of our mission coworker, Dory Halmerson, who's been in Honduras for several years. And then there's folks from different congregations, different presbyteries, some from Alabama, Tampa, Carlisle, kind of all over, a host of people that have been involved in mission work in Honduras, and that are also part of, it's a Presbyterian network, I should say, if I didn't already. And, actually one kind of, I don't know, byproduct or blessing of this was, until that point, we had only been doing conference calls via telephone where you couldn't see anybody. Well, if there's anything we learned in the first couple of weeks, it's that Zoom existed and that this is a thing where you can actually, you can meet virtually. It certainly has its quirks and is, it can be just goofy and glitchy and this and that. But it was actually really nice to see. So for the first time, that network met on Zoom, and we could actually see one another. And it was actually really nice. But what I remember about that first network call after things really began to shut down is everybody was just really sad. I mean, if there's one thing I would say about the international mission partnerships that, has been a real focus, is that it's about the relationships. And so for me, those early meetings really spoke volumes of, the love that existed in that community. It's, groups that travel, some multiple times a year, are hosted by these partners in Honduras, and have meaningful interactions and develop relationships. And sometimes, you don't often really, it's hard to quantify the depth of a relationship, but I think when we're tested, when we go through difficult situations, you really, I think, you really become, your eyes are opened to the love that exists in a relationship. And so I think, those early weeks is sort of like this unknowing of what is this going to mean going forward. And, so right from the get-go, there are some challenges that became pretty immediately apparent. One is just really, probably really obvious, which Craig mentioned even in the introduction, that for these partnerships, travel in country to be together in person has always been a pretty vital component. It's and in some ways, it's sort of like the part of these partnerships that you spend so much time planning. You plan the mission trip, you plan the time together, what you're going to do, where you're going to stay, transportation, things like that. And so the week when you're in country, or the whatever it might be, the several days, that's sort of like the all the momentum of the planning is going to that experience. And travel is one of, I guess, anyway, travel is one thing now that's just impossible, because of COVID. So that was certainly a challenge. The other challenge was, as we in our daily lives became more reliant upon technology for everything, for attending church, for attending meetings, for keeping in touch with family and friends. We're kind of wrestling with, okay, so we can try to shift to doing more with technology with some of these partnerships. But the challenge with that, well, there's a couple even within this challenge of technology, is that in a lot of these places, like I mentioned, when we were in Honduras, where we had no cell signal, until we got back to where we were staying. So a lot of these places, a lot of communities might not have the access to get on a Zoom call. They might not have a lap, literally they might not have a device that would enable them to do that. Now some would, but certainly not everyone. So that was a challenge to think about. How can we actually get in touch with people? And now, fortunately, we had already had a practice of staying in touch via. Has anyone ever heard of or used WhatsApp? So it's a messaging app. It's sort of like text messaging, but it's very, very widely used in other countries, and to communicate, but also to communicate to folks in the States. So we had already been doing that with a lot of the people that we have had connections with. So the technology, having access to good internet, cell signal, the devices that would facilitate, getting together, but also just, the language barrier. I mean, even for me, and I'm, I guarantee you it has suffered some from not as much use, but, I'm very comfortable with the Spanish language, but there is something that is just so difficult about being, having the conversation mediated through technology that makes it very difficult to pick up on, to read lips, or to just catch, the audio can sometimes not be great. So it's just the language barrier. It was a challenge, and would be a challenge as we went forward. So just a number of challenges, but really they kind of go back to the fact that we're heading into this reality without the ability, without the opportunity to be in person together, which sort of makes a lot of the challenges of international partnerships go away, because you can sit face to face, you can share meals together, you can do all those kinds of things. So the thing that I think in all of these different partnerships that we began to think about was, some key principles that would have to guide the next, months, year and a half, is that we had to find ways and to find new ways to support the folks who are already in these places, in these communities, or to support the people who have access to the communities we would normally travel to ourselves. And then the second thing would be to use the time where projects might be difficult. Use the time to try to develop relationships and just maintain that connection. I mean, honestly, a lot of times in that network call I mentioned, so many people just communicated how frustrating it was to just feel like they couldn't do anything, and by not traveling, people had plans to build houses or to do projects that involved lots of materials and groups coming down, medical brigades, things like that, and they just felt like we have to just sit around. So it was very difficult. So what I want to do now over the next through the next kind of section of this is just walk through a few of our international partnerships, and just to talk about some of the things that have been able to occur. And I'll start with Living Waters for the World, which I mentioned is the that's the partnership with whom I was traveling right before COVID started back in March 2020. So Living Waters for the World, they have impressed me so much throughout COVID. I mean, every organization, big and small, right? And you've, like, how many times have you heard the word pivot throughout COVID? Like, everybody's talking about having to pivot. We had this model for doing things, we had to pivot to something else. Living Waters for the World has, they've pivoted about as well as any organization I have seen. Now, one of the things that I think has really helped them throughout the pandemic is the way that they're structured. I don't know how many years ago, because time has just sort of lost its meaning throughout COVID, but at some point a few years ago, I did a presentation here talking about Living Waters for the World and sort of how they're organized. They're organized through this principle of networks. And so what that means is, they are not organized in a way where all of the wisdom and the know-how and the expertise exists, in the United States, sort of the organizational level. They have folks in every country that they work. The primary objective through everything is to develop what they call networks, in-country networks. So I'll just talk about Honduras, because that's where we have worked with Living Waters for the World. Living Waters for the World has a staff of 4 people who, Hondurans, so they live in the country of Honduras. They've been trained by Living Waters for the World in various aspects of Living Waters Project. So they have folks who are equipped to train, in the education side of things. When you install a water system, you're not just installing a water system in a building. You're also educating leaders in the community who will then continue that education. It's a teach the teacher model, so that it becomes sustainable. They have folks equipped at the project management level to work with communities on organizing and developing business plans for their water systems, how they'll be sustainable, things like that. So they already have in-country staff in Honduras. I mean, that alone was huge. But they also have a network similar to the monthly call I do at the broader Presbyterian level of Honduras Mission. I'm on a monthly call specifically with Living Waters Honduras network, where there's a whole community of folks around the country and also with the Living Water staff who regularly are in communication together. So Living Waters for the World was right because of that model, because of that emphasis on having networks in country. They were equipped to really have access to these communities when the groups and churches from the States couldn't travel. The other thing I'll just mention, I didn't actually have it in my notes, but it just occurred to me. One of the things that Living Waters does every year is what they call Clean Water University, and this is where, like, when we're gonna when we want to start being involved with Living Waters, we send leaders who are going to be part of a future team. We'll send them to Clean Water University. There's one that's held at a camp in Mississippi, and then there hopefully one day there was going to be, and then it was canceled. But there's going to be one in I think it's Camp Johnsonburg in New Jersey. At Clean Water University, it's a week-long training and fellowship experience where, like, if we were to send 3 people, you are trained in the 3 different areas of a project. Now, it was an incredible experience in person, and when I was talking about pivoting, Living Waters for the World, when COVID hit, they did not cancel. Well, actually, they might have canceled. They might have canceled the April Clean Water University just because there was not enough time to figure out what it would mean to do it totally, virtually. But for October, they did a virtual Clean Water University, and I participated in it. I did the training in the education track, and again, like I said, they have impressed me so thoroughly. It was one of the best adapted experiences, where, like, because I experienced it in person a few years ago, and then I experienced it virtually. So Living Waters has just a top-notch team in the States and around the world in the countries they work in, and so they were, I feel like, very, very well equipped to live into this new reality. Another program that already existed before COVID that I think really has helped the work continue was something called Hondurans Helping Hondurans. And this started back in about 2014. Honduras is one of the biggest networks in the Living Waters family of countries where there are systems. It has, I think at the last count, it has over about 150 Living Waters water systems throughout the country. And they have 4 staff. It's not the largest network, but that's pretty. Most countries would probably have 1 or 2 staff, but because of the size and the amount of systems that there are, there's 4. Hondurans Helping Hondurans started as this idea that was generated by the in-country staff, where as they were doing new installations, they made sure to build into the DNA of the project and the ethos and the philosophy to pay it forward and to have this pay it forward mentality, where as their system was doing well and generating income, moving towards sustainability, that they would set aside funds for future installations in a neighboring community. And so what would happen is you'd have a number of systems, that these water systems are not like big water plants. I mean, they serve small communities, often under 1,000 people. And so as you have several of them in a particular geographic area, they're all encouraged to pool together their resources so that if they hear, and then what also happens is this word of mouth, let's say I have a cousin in a community down the road, and it's, oh, like we just this organization, Aguas Vivas para el Mundo, Living Waters for the World. They just did they put in a water system in our community, and it was so exciting, and now we have clean water. We're less sick, so they're telling their family, or so it's a lot of word of mouth. And so what was happening then is you'd have all these communities that were pulling together resources. You have the staff who's in country really encouraging this and organizing and generating excitement for new installations. And then what would happen, part of this model, now the funds, the fund, a water system, the equipment alone, it's probably about not quite $4,000, maybe when you add in like the jugs of water, it comes out maybe to about 4,000. That's still a pretty high amount for what systems could realistically have, disposable to pay it forward to that extent. So they still, in this Hondurans helping Hondurans model, would seek out a sponsoring church or organization to help just with some of the funding. So that model was already in place, which was huge in Living Waters. And another way that they would kind of help to keep the cost down is they would refurbish systems. So they would take, if there was equipment, I'd say that the rates, the last I saw, about 85% of Living Water systems, now that's across all their countries, about 85% of them have reached sustainability. The other 15% or so, various things could happen, but it does happen sometimes that a water system is in a building, but it's not necessarily being used, and so they'll go in, assess if what parts can be reused. So in these projects, they often will use refurbished systems. So that model was already in place. And so fast forward to October, about a year ago, towards the end of the month, and we sponsored a new installation without getting on a plane, without setting foot in the country. It was a very, very, it's a very different kind of experience, but it showed us that, honestly, thinking back to this year, this was so, like I mentioned, just this feeling like, we weren't able to like do anything, and not having the in-person experiences was so difficult, because when people that go on these kinds of trips, they talk about the relationships, they talk about the time in community and fellowship, and to not have that, for the last 6-7 months up through October of 2020, it just was such a loss. But this experience was so exciting, because it felt like, in spite of the difficulties and the limitations and the challenges, like the work is continuing, and we're still able to do this work. We were, because of the way that Living Waters was organized and they had all these things in place, the in-country staff, they were able to travel to these sites, and then through the magical power of technology, I was able, and some others who are on or some of the leaders from our church, we were able to be part of video conference calls with this community, doing the things that we normally would do in person, but doing them through, I think in this case, it was WhatsApp. So these photos here, this is from the week that the Living Waters staff team was in site. This is in a community named Valladolid. And so this happened towards, it's coming up on the year anniversary. The picture on the left, the way they did it, because now Honduras, like our country, they had a number of restrictions and guidelines in place because of COVID. So what what you see is, so I apologize to Law Wright, whose face is cut off, but he's in the pink polo shirt. He was on this call with me. So I mentioned there's three components to a Living Waters installation, or an implementation, I should say. There's the actual system that's going, in place, being installed. There's a group that are going through an education curriculum. So they're, folks will teach teachers, or they'll teach folks in the community that will then carry on that program of education. And then there's a group that's kind of like the administrative head of the whole project, the whole endeavor. So there's three different entities that meet. And the way they had this organized was each of those groups, they were meeting in different places. So the picture on the left was, it was all happening in kind of a blur, but they basically kind of took us around to where each of these three groups were meeting. So we got to see the group that was putting in the system. That's the picture to the left of my, big head in that picture. And in the upper left, I'm not sure why they got cut off. I think I might have just imported it wrong or something. But in the upper left, that's the education team. And then Law was another Westminster member who was on that call with me. The picture on the right is at the water celebration. So at the end of an implementation week, the community always gathers. Now it was very different, as you might imagine. Probably not as many people that would have come out. Everybody it was outside. It was distanced. But what happens is, usually the mayor will be there. They'll come and they'll dedicate the system. It's a very, very, it's just a really, really beautiful celebration that happens on these. And this was on a Sunday afternoon, and so I was able to attend this, like we were attending everything in those days, via WhatsApp. Now you can do video calls through WhatsApp. So one of the Living Waters staff, who was sitting opposite the table of the folks that you see holding up the cup, they always end with a water toast. So he was sitting opposite them with his phone, and so that I could see what was happening. But maybe the coolest thing that happened was, I don't remember exactly how they did it, but they had a PA system because they had various people speak. They held up. They invited me to speak to the gathered community there, and so they held up his phone, I think, to the microphone, so that my voice was coming through the PA, and I was able to speak to this community. Which it was, of course, it would have been great to be there, and of course it would have been, a lot of things would have been better, right, than being in a pandemic and having those limitations. But it was just such a beautiful moment for me to be able to say, through technology and through our partnerships, through our relationships, I'm John Frost. I'm one of the pastors at this congregation. We're so thrilled to be part of this project, bringing clean water and a way for you to produce clean water right in your own community. We can't wait to celebrate with you, in the years ahead. And so it was just a really wonderful celebration. And then just the last thing I'll say about Living Waters is we just approved a few weeks ago to support another project in the same model that's fairly close geographically to where this community is. So that should be happening in the next couple of months. I got a couple of just a couple bullet point notes from Chris Clark, our youth director. He's more directly involved with the Youth Honduras Partnership. I have been in the past. I've been a couple of times with our youth that have gone. I know, Rob, Kemper Young, your grandson, a very, very big part of these over the years. So some of the things that they've done, the virtual trips. This was something we did with Youth Honduras and also the Estado 29 Orphanage in Mexico. Now, it's very, I will say it's very hard. I mean, it's hard enough to get adults together and to like coordinate a time to meet, via Zoom or via WhatsApp or something. It's very challenging with children and youth to make that happen. But we did the best we could to at least, honor the fact that we would normally have been traveling during these weeks. And so we scheduled a few different times throughout the week to do these, Zoom calls where we did some games. I know Chris held, they did some, almost like, Bible studies with the groups together. But just a chance to fellowship and to hang out together. They were not, obviously you can't do Zoom for like 8 hours a day for a week because we would all, no one has that kind of stamina. It would just be brutal. So we did the best we could, right? And that's sort of kind of just the way we're doing with everything. The nice thing about the youth partnership is, the youth from our church and the youth from Honduras, they stay in touch anyway on their own through different means, through social media, things like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. So, and then there is something in the works that you might hear about in the coming weeks. That they're together through this youth partnership. They are going to be partnering with another organization that works in Honduras called the Chispa Project. And the Chispa Project, Chispa means spark, and they almost say it's almost like the word chutzpah, but so it's like the Spanish version of that, the Chispa Project. And what they do is they put in libraries in school. They partner with schools to install libraries in local schools, and they do so the emphasis on education, on literacy. So our youth are going to be participating in some fundraising through a book, or I guess a readathon that you might hear about, and then the library will be going into a school in a community where one of the churches that's very involved in our youth partnership is located. So there are some things that they have going on in the works as well, even though we can't travel. Shifting to just a couple of things that were new during COVID. I'll just talk about a couple of World Vision endeavors. So, World Vision is a nonprofit that does work all around the world. They work just a countless number of places, and they do a lot of different kind of work. But one of the biggest things they do is water projects. Now we had actually planned to participate in the global 6K for water before COVID hit, and this was another thing actually that I thought, in some ways, I'm very curious to like if you could experience an alternate reality, if we had experienced that first global 6K in a normal world where everybody was kind of had their normal lives and families were as busy as they usually are, in some ways as they are again, it might have been very different. But that first year in the global 6K for water, which we ended up just doing, people could participate, but they ran or walked or, biked or pushed strollers, or hiked just on their own, or maybe even in small groups. I think, I saw you, Ted, and Cheryl over, I guess near Exton?
Chester Valley Trail.
Yeah, Chester Valley Trail. And so people were doing it all over. And every registration, it was a $50 registration. The cost to provide access to one person, the cost to provide water access for one person was about $50. That's how they talk about what with the registration fee. That first year we had I want to say over 300 participants. So that includes everybody, adults, children, youth, and we raised about $44,000 that first year. And that was the most. So we were a host site, and so we were kind of registered as a team, Westminster Family and Friends. And I mean, it blew my mind that we raised the most money of any team in the United States, and there was probably over 1,000 teams. I mean, it blew my mind, but also it wasn't surprising. I mean, if there was anything that became repeatedly apparent, it was the generosity of this congregation just never ceased to amaze us, and this was another example of that. We did this again this past May, and though the participation wasn't as high as that first year, it was a very different world, May of 21 compared to May of 2020. I mean, people were back to, sports leagues were back in action. So at least my perception was, families were a lot busier, but we still had, I think, just under 200 participants, and we raised a little over $30,000. So, in 2 years, we raised approximately $75,000 that will go towards World Vision's water projects around the world. So this was like another just really kind of timely thing that, the first year we did the 6K, really, I mean, it felt almost like a desert of program, because just everything, most things were not meeting in person. A lot of groups hadn't yet adapted to, okay, like, let's figure out how we can do this virtually. So this was just it was like, I mean, I remember, like, visually, I can remember, like, seeing, like, my calendar on the weekends just like blank, because like no events were happening, no travel was happening. But this was on the calendar, and for the weeks leading up to it, it felt like, this is like one of the only things that I feel like, is able to happen right now, because it was very easily adaptable. So that was a great experience and great success. Craig mentioned Chosen. Chosen, if you were here for worship the last 2 weeks of August, we had we had a guest preacher the first Sunday, and he was here the second week as well to talk about this. And what Chosen is, it's World Vision has been one of a number of organizations that have had child sponsorship as part of their one of their main ways of funding their development work. And so you might be familiar with this. Compassion International is another organization, but certainly they're not the only ones. But with Chosen, what they've done is they've kind of flipped it on its head a little bit. Traditionally, you would go to an event and there'd be an invitation to consider being a sponsor, and you'd go out into the lobby or something, and there'd be pictures of children, up on a board or something, and then you'd say, oh, I want to sponsor that child, and then you'd get a card, you'd sign up, and then you'd kind of have this ongoing relationship. So with Chosen, what they did is they flipped that part of the process, where instead of us choosing the child we sponsor, they would empower the children in this community to choose us. So there was and there's a lot of logistics that I don't know about, because it's from World Vision side. We had this week period from August 22nd to August 29th. We launched on the 22nd and then wrapped up Sunday evening, the 29th. We were partnering with their work in Vietnam in this particular community called the Lam Binh community. And so all of the registrations that we had during that week we're going to be part of a choosing party in that community. And so what happened, and we showed a little clip of it in worship on the 29th, is children walked into this room, and instead of children's faces on these photos, they saw pictures of us and pictures of Westminster members, and then the children walked up and they chose their sponsor. And then from that point on, what happens is everybody who participated, now has this opportunity to see over the course of years, just how the work in that community unfolds. It's a community where they just started working, so they're in one of the earliest phases of their work, as they describe the different phases in their work. And so, it's World Vision stuff is a little bit different because it's all facilitated through World Vision and their website, and it's not going through the church, so it's a little bit of a different program, whereas like Living Waters for the World, the Youth Honduras Partnership, those are things that come from the church budget and things like that. World Vision is sort of like, almost, I think in one of the ways Don described it, is almost like kind of like second mile kind of thing. If the people that felt called to it, they have their own account with World Vision, and they can manage it. They can send messages to the kids. They can receive messages back. So it still has that relational component. The last thing I did, because I want to try to leave some time for some questions, and I'll end talking about Estado 29 Orphanage in Mexico. We also did a virtual trip around the same time that we did with Honduras, and again, it was kind of bedlam. If you can imagine. I mean, if you ever Zoomed with like grandkids, I mean, it's like depending on their age. I mean, I have our kids are 4, and they last about, I'd say, 5 minutes, on a FaceTime call before they just, start, tearing the room apart. So again, we kind of try to do the best we could. The other thing, just as an update, and this is kind of an unfolding situation that we're keeping an eye on and trying to get better information about. Around the beginning of this calendar year, we did get word that the orphanage is temporarily without children. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this, but I just wanted to update you all, because we talked about it at session a couple of months ago. All I'll say, they've been in the process for several years. There's an interesting, as best I can understand it, relationship with the government in Mexico, where the government really does not help places like Estado 29 financially with any kind of aid. And then several years ago, I guess, and who knows, I don't know if it was just a different government or just what changed, but they were really starting to, thankfully, they're really starting to monitor, because there's lots of communities like Estado 29, particularly in Baja California. They were putting out all of these requirements that these places had to be compliant with by a certain time, and it had to do with things like safety, like having adequate fire alarms, fire escapes, safety protocols and plans, and all. It was a very, very comprehensive list of things. And as they were working towards that goal of becoming fully compliant, the director at the time, Deborah, died. That was just a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years now, and that really that really disrupted, I think, the from an organizational perspective. I think so. There was kind of a change in leadership that picked up where they left off. But to try to, without making the story too long, I think what happened is basically they said, the government temporarily is relocated the children until at such a time that they are able to check all the boxes that they've done all these steps that they're supposed to do. So we're really, I don't know what's the word, we're really sad about that. I'm trying to get a better understanding. It's hard this is one of those things that's hard not being in person to get to be able to see up close like what's going on and to get good information and good updates. I know they've said they've done it all. They've submitted all the paperwork months ago and are just waiting to hear back and hear that that children can begin coming back there. So I'm happy to talk more about that with whatever I do know. We're like I said, we're monitoring that, going forward. And then I'll just end with this. Some ongoing questions that at least are on my mind when it comes to international partnerships is just how has this forever changed what partnerships look like? We now know that we can use things like Zoom and WhatsApp to talk to people. So might that mean, maybe for like Living Waters, for example, when sometimes for one project, it might mean traveling in country 3 times. Well, maybe that means we can do a lot of the upfront work remotely, like we can just be in conversation. Maybe it means not as much travel and cutting down on those kinds of costs. I wonder how willing are people going to be to travel into other places, particularly youth and children. I just think it's hard to see right now how the last 19 months have changed us. How have the last 19 months changed the way parents feel about their kids participating in international mission trips? That I think remains to be seen. And then the last thing is just, the recommendation still from for Honduras anyway, from the denomination Presbyterian World Mission is to not travel to put, the vaccination rate in Honduras is about 25%, I think, of the population. But not only that, but if someone were to travel and get sick, and we're in this remote area, it's like, the access to good healthcare is going to be very suspect. So I will wrap it up there, and I understand. Happy to talk further, answer questions. If you need to get going somewhere else, that is totally fine. Let me.
John, this is Conrad Oley.
Yeah.
Just wanted to mention, if I may, I've shared the same kind of experience you've had. I serve on the board of Serving at the Crossroads. I've been treasurer of that for about 6+ years. We had the same kind of thing in terms of our mission there in the Manos Amigas clinic that we founded there. It's certainly, trying to adapt to make the technology work and so on. But yeah, the same kind of thing. They operate the clinic themselves. So we're sort of a little bit hands off. We're basically the fundraising arm to provide them with, the funding to operate a clinic kind of thing. We want to aid, inform, empower, locally, but that certainly has been challenged. One of the things we have done is to augment the services they provide down there by periodically, a couple of times a year, sending brigades of professionals like doctors or dentists, eye people, that sort of thing. But yeah, with the COVID thing, it's hard to, promote going down there with those kind of cautions that you've talked about. So yeah, it's a different world that we're still coping with. And how do we make equipment investments kind of thing down there when it's hard to ship things in? For buying something, we'd like it to be down there in service, but it's just the whole supply chain is, it's really, it's been very challenging indeed. So,
and not even to mention that there were 2 hurricanes, in 2020 that drastically affected Honduras, and especially the area where the clinic is. They had and that really shifted the kinds of work that they did in the aftermath of those 2 hurricanes. So yeah, it's been hard. It's been hard. Work has been able to continue. God's been doing amazing things. But still, it's difficult, and I think it's just required. I'm so thankful for the relational aspect of it, because the sense that we're in this together, and I think, and I'm glad you brought up the clinic. And like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm only speaking to the things that I have pretty direct knowledge of. But I think the clinic is a great example of, it's in situations like this where you're very thankful you've invested in local leadership that's been empowered to lead and to, so that's great.
Yeah,
God is good and he will provide. We thank him for his goodness that he has provided in the meantime.
I'm glad for the work you and others are doing. John, but what Conrad just mentioned, I'm glad to hear the name of Serving at the Crossroads, because that connection was started by Bob Sumner, our member and dentist. And I think Mike Tysowski is on the board. And I would like to hear if there is any way of connecting the Serving at the Crossroads with the other Honduras work that you are doing.
Yeah, I did throughout at some point in the last several months, I did connect Mike Tasowski with Dory Halmerson, the mission coworker, the Presbyterian mission coworker in Honduras. Sorry, I'll move over a little more. This way, because she has relationships throughout the country. Where the clinic is located, it's not very close to. Well, it's close to a couple of our systems. It's very far away from a few of the other ones, but she had not yet met Mike. Or she has not really met Serving at the Crossroads folks. After that introduction, I do know that Dory and another leader within the Presbyterian Church of Honduras visited the clinic. So they do, they do have more of an awareness of where they are, and I'm hopeful, because that was my hope too, is that it'd be great to strengthen, because of the connectivity of everybody. It would be great to just see if there's ways that we can be a mutual blessing through these different connections. So yeah.
John, you mentioned a typical $4,000 price for a water system. About how many individuals would that serve?
Yeah, I mean, the range could be like, I haven't really ever seen where once, I would say it's 1,000 people, like let's say a community that had a population of 1,000 would probably be the biggest, where one would suffice. I think generally it's more like in the 700-ish range.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you go on these trips, where do you stay?
So sometimes we stay in hotels that are roughly like, some of our installations, we stayed at a hotel. We try to stay no further than an hour. I mean, preferably we'd like to be like no more than a half hour, but sometimes it's just not feasible necessarily. One of my favorite places to stay though is in a home of this family that just has become kind of this, it's their house, but they have hosted Presbyterian groups for many years. And that's actually a community that's relatively close to where the clinic is, in community Trinidad de Copan. I love it because it is like everything. I mean, they have this amazing, they grow so much of the food that they then feed us with. And I love food. I don't know if I've ever said that before, but it's just, it's one of the, like, hotels are nice and great, but there's something about staying there where it's just this warmth and hospitality. They grow their own coffee beans. I mean, are you kidding me? And just wonderful, wonderful people. It's funny because the actual facilities, like the shower and the bathroom, are definitely not like would be my preference. Like I'd much prefer a bathroom in a hotel, but I would totally trade the hospitality and the warmth of their home for any of those kinds of comforts.
Do you reimburse them?
We do, yeah. So and they have a price. Like I contact them if I know we have a trip coming up, and I say, hey, these are the dates we're hoping to travel. It'll be this many people, and then they'll tell us what that would cost. It's unbelievably reasonable when we stay with them. So Great. Well, thank you so much for your time and.
Do you think Steve and Craig realized everybody was watching Peter's breakfast?
Yes.
I agree. That's what I do.
A little distracting.
Thanks, John.
I dropped this off over at the church office. Pledge for next year.
All right, are you walking through?
Yeah.
Then we'll drop this way.
All right.
Good to see you.
I got this Sunday birthday party.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you, Conrad.
The time frame that I mentioned,
Actually,
that was
when
really
we were
like,
away in Avalon,
like the
we had
launch
a
here at
small
Westminster.
party.
You can still